All right, welcome back, grade 10s. We're going to give you some more time to work on that paragraph, so don't be too concerned about it. I know I said I'm taking it in for marks, and I can see how that would make you want to really focus on it, but we'll get lots more time today, and you'll be able to hand in your best work. So if I can get you to kind of put that paragraph off to the side for a second. We're going to do a practice question or two here, and then we're going to continue our look at sustainability. So we do have our midterm coming up, and what I've done for some of the questions is I've pulled the sources straight off of our lesson. So one way to study for social studies multiple choice tests is if you have these online lessons, and if we're together next year in grade 11, you'll have them, and if we're together in grade 12, you'll have them, because I have digital textbooks for each year now. But if you have these online lessons, then one way to study would be to look at the sources within the lessons and try to break them down. Try to break down the data or the etymological perspective and see if you can apply it to some of the language that we have been studying. So for example, here's one of the charts right at the beginning of our lesson that we're studying on sustainability. So I've just taken the chart and then I've added a quote, and then I have a question that refers back to a case study in Gandhi that we will watch together. So what I do is I take some stuff that we've studied and I try to connect it to some other stuff that we've also studied maybe in a previous unit. So given that Gandhi once, this should say declared, decried, is that even a word? Given that Gandhi once declared that poverty was the most severe form of oppression, he would be most concerned with which assertion from source 2. So now I need to go back to source 2. I don't need to go to source 1 for this question. So when we're doing the questions, it's always best to read the stem first so that you know which data that you need to be looking at. So given that Gandhi once declared that poverty was the most severe form of oppression, he would be most concerned. And it says most concerned in bold there, because he might be concerned about more than one of these, but he's most concerned with which of these assertions. So here's source 2. I understand human needs. I grew up where far too many people live day to day without elemental needs like food and shelter. Everybody needs beauty as well as bread, places to play in and pray in, where nature may heal and give strength to body and soul. We already have, thanks to technology, development skills, the efficiency of our work, enough resources to satisfy all human needs. But we don't have enough resources, and we are unlikely ever to have enough to satisfy human greed. So given that Gandhi once declared that poverty was the most severe form of oppression, he would be most concerned with which of these quotes. I grew up where far too many people live day to day without elemental needs like food and shelter. So now I have to pause before I try to read too much and have too many things bouncing around in my mind together. Just consider A and the validity of A. Could A be a valid answer? So Gandhi says poverty is the most severe form of oppression. And because of that, he'd be worried about something. Would he be worried that this guy grew up where far too many people live day to day without their basic needs like food and shelter? Oh, maybe, for sure, right? Not having food, not having shelter are descriptors of living in poverty. And if there's descriptors that these people are living in poverty, then that's evidence that there's oppression, because poverty is the worst form of oppression. So there is what I would say a pull to A. But I haven't attempted the other 3, so I'm not going to just circle A and move on. I am going to put an M next to it though for a maybe, because there is a link there. There is a pull. Everybody needs beauty as well as bread, places to play and pray in, where nature may heal and give strength to body and soul. There's a huge environmental pull to B, right? You definitely see an environmental thing. That poverty was the most severe form of oppression. Am I seeing B talk about poverty? A was talking about poverty. Is B talking about poverty? Everybody needs beauty as well as bread. Places to play and pray in. So it's not talking about a shortage of bread. It's just talking about, do we have a beautiful environment? And yes, we'd be impoverished if our environment is not clean. But there's not even evidence there that that's what it's talking about. So I'm gonna pass on B. But I'm gonna totally explore the validity of B before I pass on it, because I don't still want to be thinking about B when I'm looking at C. So then I get to C. We already have, thanks to technology, development skills, the efficiency of our work, enough resources to satisfy all human needs. Well, this can't be the answer, because this is a positive. The tone here would be positive, right? The tone here is saying, hey, we already have all the stuff we need to satisfy everyone's needs. Well, that's a good thing. If poverty is the worst form of oppression, and we have the technology to provide everyone's needs, then Gandhi should be excited about this. So if this changed and said, given that Gandhi once declared this, he would be most excited with which assertion from source 2, the answer is C. But it doesn't say excited, it says concerned. So C's our worst answer. We're going to get rid of C. And then D, but we don't have enough resources, and we are unlikely ever to have to satisfy human greed. So now I got another maybe, right? So now I'm down to A and D. 50% chance of getting it right. I'm going to go back to the source and make sure I understand what it's reading. It says, given that Gandhi once declared that poverty was the most severe form of oppression. So again, the source is saying that Gandhi's concerned about poverty. He would be most concerned with which assertion. So which statement would be like, oh man, I can't believe that's happening. And he's concerned about poverty. I grew up where far too many people live day to day without food and shelter, or we don't have enough resources because of human greed. So there's a pull to both. They're both the right answers, but which one is he most concerned about? If let's get rid of Gandhi in the equation. Let's just use you. Let's use you, anyone. If somebody's like, you know what, I really am concerned about poverty. And you're like, oh, well, I grew up at a place where people didn't even have food. People didn't have shelter. There's homeless people. How concerning is that on a scale of 1 to 10? That, oh, no, they didn't have food. People starved to death. They didn't have shelter. They slept outside in the elements. Some maybe froze to death. That's pretty concerning, right? On a scale of 1 to 10, that might be closer to 10 than 1. But we don't have enough resources, and we are unlikely ever to have to satisfy human greed. So D is saying we're always going to have poverty because of greed. A is saying we have people without food and shelter. D is saying we're always going to have it because of greed. I grew up here where there's like poverty. I grew up in Rutland, BC. There's poverty, there's people without food and shelter. We have homeless people. D is saying we're always going to have it because people are greedy. Which one's Gandhi, or this person that's concerned about mankind? Which one's going to be like, oh man, now I got to sit down. That sucks. Which one sucks more? A or D? Which one sucks more? So you got two scenarios. Scenario one, this guy comes up and says, you know what? I grew up in a place where people didn't have enough food and shelter. That sucks. And then this other person comes up and says, well, guess what? We're never going to be able to satisfy everyone's needs because we're greedy people. That sucks. Which one sucks more? This guy grew up in a place where some people didn't have food and shelter, or this guy telling you that we're never going to have enough for everyone? Which one sucks more? In the pile of suckdom, which one has more suck? So think about how much suffering, how much poverty are we talking about here? Which one's worse poverty? This guy grew up in a place, Rutland, BC. There's some homeless people. There's some people that died of starvation. That's horrible, right? People die because of poverty. That's evidence that Gandhi's true. It's very oppressive. Gandhi's talked about poverty being the worst form of oppression, and D is saying, well, you know what? It's not just Rutland, it's everywhere. It's going to be forever. Not just when you grew up, it's going to be when your great-great-great-grandchildren grow up as well, because We're greedy people. Which one is it, A or D? You have your hand up? How many people think it's D? That's a tough question. The answer is D. There you go. But look at me. I made the question. It took me 5 minutes to come up with the answer. And I mean, I didn't have the answer key out. I didn't know the answer. It took me a while to find it. It should take you a while to find it. Right? And there is a pull to A. Like, there's a huge pull to A. Again, I'm thinking about it. I can see the people that they're living at the brink of poverty, right? They're living at the brink of death. And that's horrible. But this one goes further in saying, you know, this is going to be not just now, but forever. And it's not just there, it's everywhere. And it's oppression because of the nature of mankind. Good luck changing the nature of mankind. That's what makes it bigger. Instead of just a local story, this is everywhere. That's what makes it the better answer. The next one comes back to chapter 9 and a couple of people in chapter 9 and some names that also popped up in the documentary The Corporation. So Milton Friedman is like Adam Smith, and you studied about Adam Smith last year in grade 9 social studies. Adam Smith is a capitalist. Some people may say he is the father of capitalism, the father of laissez-faire capitalism. They are proponents of the free market. So whenever I see a name in the source, I'm going to pause and do some unpacking and say, okay. And I don't know if you were a student at the time when webs were big and all teachers was like, let's make webs. And it's like, oh, not another web, right? Because there was a time, probably maybe before you were in school though, because it was like 06, 07, 08, 09 kind of stuff. We were making webs for everything. But the nice thing is, if their brains are wired so that you're a very visual learner, then when I see Friedman, you know, in my mind, I see a web of everything that connects to Friedman. And it makes the question a lot easier. So how do you become a stronger multiple choice question writer? Somewhat comes down to the notes you're taking. Sadly, everything almost comes down to the notes you're taking. So in your cast of characters that you're not handing in for marks, but you need to be making, what do we know about certain individuals? And by the time you get to Social 30, your cast of characters will be critical, because you'll have lots of questions like this, where knowing the key character in the source will help you, or the question in the STEM will help you get the question right. So, responding to claims that economic liberalism, so I'm going to pause, I'm going to be like, oh man, do I know what that means? Economic liberalism, capitalism on a global scale, free market everywhere. Okay. Responding to claims that economic liberalism has only magnified global economic disparity. Pause, what does disparity mean? Rich and poor, have and have-nots, gap between the 1% and the 99. And economists like Milton Friedman, who likes capitalism, would use the data in the chart to support the claim that. So there's so many steps here. To get number 2 right, you have to know what economic liberalism means. You have to know what disparity means. You have to know what Milton Friedman's objective is. And then you have to go back to the chart and be able to use Friedman and say, what would he pull out from it? So it starts with vocab, starts with knowing a cast of characters. So, let's work through this. Responding to claims that economic liberalism has only magnified global economic disparity, and economists like Milton Friedman would use the data in the chart to support the claim that. So if I had this test, a paper copy of the test, and you'll have a paper copy, I would tear that page off. So I might tear the page off, or I might open it up like this so I can see both things at the same time. So that I can see the question and see the chart. So I'm looking at the chart and I'm trying to see some evidence that Milton Friedman might use, a capitalist might use. So the good news is they give us 4 possibilities. Since 1944, the world has benefited from unprecedented growth due to economic freedom and opportunity. So wait, if I think capitalism's good, if I think economic liberalism's good, when did economic liberalism really get introduced on the global scale? 1944, Bretton Woods. Okay, so I see why 44 is there. So since Bretton Woods, the world has benefited from unprecedented growth due to economic freedom and opportunity. If I like economic liberalism, would I use this as my supporting evidence? That, hey, let's look back to the birth of contemporary economic liberalism and say, look, the world has seen so much growth. That's logical, right? Of course they would do that. If I'm trying to sell you on brand X steroids, I might say, hey, let's look at a chart of when I started using brand X steroids, and let's look at my body mass index. Let's look at my bench press and my squat and my deadlift. And can you tell I'd rather be working out right now? But let's look at those numbers. That's the numbers you'd use. So he's trying to sell us on economic liberalism. Goes back to Bretton Woods and says, hey, let's look at the growth. Can we see numbers in this chart that shows that? So it goes back to 1981, not 1944. So that causes me a little frustration that I'm not sure that we could make that conclusion to 1944. The graph's not showing us that. The graph is showing what is the graph showing? So this is how many people live on less than $1 a day. This is how many people live on less than $2 a day. And it looks like in sub-Saharan Africa, more and more people are living on less than $1 a day. In Latin America, it's fairly flat. In East Asia and the Pacific, lots more people are living in wealth. So this is a success story for capitalism. This, not really, it's kind of flat. And life has actually gotten worse here. So now I'm going to go back and actually look at the chart. And looking at the chart, responding to claims that economic liberalism has only magnified global economic disparity, and economists would use the data in the chart from source one to support the claim that. I'm not sure that the data is there to do that. I'm not seeing 1944. That's what they would argue. But I'm not sure that the data in the chart showing that. So I'm going to move on to B. I'm going to consider another option. Consumers can access a great variety of products. Developing nations have found their niche, and due to innovation and freedom, our global economic future looks bright. He would say that too, but does the chart say that? You know, that seems to be ignoring a lot of this chart. So again, he would definitely say that, but does that connect to the chart? Where there is poverty, I see the unequal distribution of capitalism. The solution to poverty is more capitalism. Okay, wait a minute. You're telling me Milton Friedman likes capitalism. C is saying the solution to poverty is capitalism. C is saying that there is poverty. The chart says there is poverty. But the chart is also saying that there's places that have come out of poverty. Could it be that Milton Friedman would use this chart and say, hey, look, these people have made their way out of poverty because they've embraced capitalism. These people haven't made their way out of poverty. What do they need? They need more I knew that was going to happen. They need more capitalism. Would that be what Milton Friedman would say, based upon the chart? Well, let's look at our fourth option. Economic liberalism is flawed because it is an invention of man and man is flawed. This guy likes economic liberalism. He's trying to sell us on that. If I'm trying to sell you on vanilla ice cream, you come to my store, and I'm like, well, yeah, no, vanilla ice cream is pretty gross. You're probably not going to buy it. Why would he say it's flawed? He wouldn't. D's the worst answer. He would say A, B, and C, but only one of these links back to the data in the chart, and that is C. Again, it took me 5 or more minutes. If you're doing these questions in 30 seconds and getting them wrong, it's because you're not doing the questions. You're not going through the steps. many steps here. I had to logically think about each option. Because you know what? There's a pull to all three of those, A, B, and C. But only one actually takes into account that chart. And it says, would use the data in the chart. Because it says that, because it says this in the STEM, C is the only answer that it can be. Do you see that? Without the would use the data in the chart thing, then you have three possible right answers. But because it says that, the answer is C. And it's the only answer. So, let's see if you, they don't like it that these are capitalized. Well, because it's a continuation of a sentence, I guess that makes sense. Let's see if you can do number 3, and then we'll move on to content. Combining the reflection from source 2 with the data from 1. So the reflection from 2, Gandhi says poverty is the worst form of violence. The data from 1, I got to go back and say, well, what was that data telling me? It was saying that in South and East Asia, things have gotten better because they have capitalism. In Latin America, things are fairly stagnant. And in sub-Saharan Africa, things have gotten worse, where there isn't very little capitalism. So when it says combining the reflection, I'm pausing and I'm saying, what's the reflection? I don't just read past it because I'm in a rush. I say, what's the reflection? Gandhi says poverty is the worst form of violence. So I might even write that here. Gandhi says poverty is the worst form of violence. From source 2 with the data from source 1, you know, capitalism, yada, 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 we can conclude that. So, let's see if you can figure out the answer. The speaker most likely grew up in sub-Saharan Africa. The sources, or the success, that we have seen is not environmentally sustainable. In order to have a future, we need all nations to embrace globalization. As a result of our innovative nature, we will achieve global social progress. I got to go back and I got to read this, right? I understand human needs. I grew up where far too many people live day to day without. So I grew up in a place where people lived without food and shelter. Speaker most likely grew up in sub-Saharan Africa. Sub-Saharan Africa, that's where most poverty is. Could that be the answer? How many people think that it's an M, a maybe? It could maybe be the answer. How many people are crossing the A off and saying no? So the speaker says, I grew up in a place where people didn't have food and shelter. The data says, sub-Saharan Africa, people are living they are living with less than $1 a day. So do you see a connection there? Right? So I'm going to put an M, even though I'm not right now saying, well, that's the answer. I'm going to put an M just in case one of the other ones is better. The success that we have seen is not environmentally sustainable. Why is it not B? The answer is not B because the two sources are not talking about the environment. So in order for it to be B, the sources have to be talking about that, and they're not. So if you pick B, I'm going to ask you, well, where's the discussion on the environment within that first source? In order to have a future, we need all nations to embrace globalization. As a result of our innovative nature, we will achieve global social progress. You know, these are all nice statements. But where is there data about our innovative nature in those sources? Where is there data about the environment within the sources? What we do see is a quote about somebody living in poverty, growing up in poverty, and then we see a source saying that there's poverty in sub-Saharan Africa. A is the only plausible answer. The problem with multiple choice in social studies is they're not simple. It takes multiple steps to find the answer. It's not like I'm making some grade 9 questions where maybe they are a little more simple, because it might be as simple as the answer might be 338, simple recall. And maybe that's the direction the province wants to go in. And when we go in that direction, the education that we're providing our students will be inferior to what we're doing now. We're looking at higher mental activity now. critical and analytical thinking rather than simple regurgitation. Regurgitation would be easier, but what's the point of that in a modern world where you can just Google stuff? So, there's 3 sample questions that we worked together. We'll do some more later on, but now we have to get to, the feature presentation, if you will, which is new content. Well, that's a great little source. So, in terms of the new content, we're going to be looking at ecological footprints here now. We have some good quotes about sustainability we're about to explore, and then we're going to go down the path to some videos. I'm not going to record us watching the videos, but I do want to go over this source together a little bit. Sustainability is a seemingly laudable goal. It tells us, this glitchy computer is just fantastic to work with. I love it. Sustainability is a seemingly laudable goal. It tells us we need to live within our means, and whether economic, ecological, or political, but it's insufficient for uncertain times. How can we live within our means when those very means can change swiftly and unexpectedly beneath us? So the complexity of sustainability is explored in this quote. When we have professional famous people like Leonardo DiCaprio, who's a global gem, quite the actor, he was brilliant on Growing Pains back in the early 90s. But when he challenges the world and says, you need to live in a more sustainable way, the reality for many people is this. Sustainability seems, like this goal, and you're talking about it and all these things, but the problem is our lives keep changing swiftly and unexpectedly beneath us. So here's a multiple choice question. We're not going to give you 4 answers. You're just going to give me the answer. From whose perspective is this quote? Who would say sustainability sounds like a great goal? Sure, we could do that, but our lives keep changing swiftly and unexpectedly beneath us. So what would be the best group of people in the world? And here's an answer. It's not like the Fortune 500. Who would be the group that would be most likely to say this? I would love to have a sustainable life, but my life keeps changing because the circumstances of it keep changing. What's a name for a group of people like that? They might be what? Who might they be? We'll see how many times my computer glitches before we can come up with a name. So a name's not like Joey. Joey's a name, right? I'm talking about like a group of people. Might they be activists? Might they be, environmentalists? What might be something that kind of describes people that would be living in these circumstances? It's like, man, I like to focus on that, but my life keeps changing. And I don't even know, what tomorrow's going to look like. Things change beyond my control. So you say I should be practicing sustainable life, and I'm just trying to survive. What type of people are doing this? What's a name for people that's their life? All they're doing is trying to survive. They're fleeing change. So, we were trying to do some sustainable farming, and then the Janjaweed came in and slaughtered everybody in my community as they ethnically cleansed this territory of the Sudan. So now I can't really worry about sustainable farming. They burnt my farm. All I can figure out is, do we have enough food today and a place to sleep tonight? What do we call people that live in those circumstances? Yes?
Impoverished, possibly?
Yeah, they're definitely impoverished. So impoverished people that are fleeing change would be who? Yes? Refugees, right? So in an answer, if you had A, people living in poverty, and B, refugees, they're both right answers, but refugees is a better answer. Because we're talking about people who are dealing with constant change, and because of that, things are changing swiftly and unexpectedly beneath them. Not everybody living in poverty is dealing with swift and unexpected change. But the videos that we watched on environmental refugees is talking about how people have become refugees because their circumstances have changed unexpectedly and swiftly beneath them. So environmental refugees, political refugees would fit that description. So I'm going to stop this, and we're going to watch some videos on ecological footprints and sustainability before our time to go outside and shiver together.